So this story from the 4th chapter of John's Gospel is one of the most famous of the Gospel stories, and it's one of the kind of central Gospels that we read in the Lenten season, and it's commonly known as the story of the woman at the well. And she gets called out by Jesus. And we have to remember that from the worldly perspective, everything with this Gospel is wrong. Everything that Jesus does is wrong. He shouldn't have been at the well by himself, period. He shouldn't have been there in the middle of the day because it was as hot as it could possibly be. He shouldn't have been alone with a woman. He shouldn't have been speaking alone with a woman, according to their culture, especially about these deep things of her own life. The disciples even say, "What are you doing? We have to go. Get away from there." He should not have been speaking with a Samaritan woman. He should not have even stopped in Samaria. Samaria, of course, was a region which was looked down upon because many years before this, the Samaritans and the Jews had commingled with each other, basically, and so the Jews and the Samaritans did not like each other. And when you look at it from the worldly perspective, you can see maybe Jesus was a great renegade, maybe he was a great courageous person, maybe he was a real, times changer or something. But when you read this for what it is, which is the gospel, you see it in a different light. It's in this gospel that Jesus reveals himself to be the Messiah. The lady says, "I can tell that you're a prophet. I can tell that you're a prophet because of what you've told me about myself, that you, as someone who I've never met, who's not from this town, would never have known about my personal history. So I can tell that you're a prophet." And Jesus takes it a step further, and he uses the phrase that you heard in the first reading that God gives to Moses. Moses asks, "I'll tell the people of Israel that we're going to leave Egypt, but they're going to want to know who made it up because I didn't make this up. So what do I tell them? Did Dave say it? Or did Pete say it? Or Josh say it? What's your name, God?" And he says very interestingly, "I am who am," which is what we get the form of the word Yahweh, which we don't use in our liturgy anymore. We used to, but we don't use it in our liturgy anymore because of how holy that word is, that name is, especially to our Jewish brothers and sisters. Actually, when we say the name Jesus, we really ought to bow when we say his name. And when we say the name of God in its fullness, if you ever said that in front of a really Orthodox Jewish person, they would bow 3 times saying the name, the name, the name, because they reverence the name of God in a beautiful way. And so we look at that name, I am who am, and it's very interesting if you read the Hebrew, because in the Hebrew, it's a very weirdly constructed phrase, because it has elements of a past tense, and it has elements in it of a future tense. They have little punctuation marks called yuds that kind of denote a future tense. And so all at once, this phrase, I am who am, it translates to I am who am, I am who was who am, I will be who was, I am who will be, I will be who am. In other words, you think about the line from the letter to the Hebrews, Jesus Christ is the same yesterday, today, and forever. So I am the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. I am the God who is outside of time. I am the God not of the dead, but of the living, all those across time and space. I am the creator, in other words. I am outside of the worldly categories. I am the ground of all being. I am the sovereign power over all time, space, heaven, and earth. And I have come to bring you out of the confines of that and give you a new kind of life. All of that from one little word, which is amazing, and another argument as to why English stinks. But different homily, different day, sorry. So Jesus is meeting with this woman at the well, and he's doing it according to the world in all the wrong ways. And I want to remember or remind you that Christianity and the world have always been at odds with one another. And both the world and the church get themselves into trouble when they begin to become too conformed, when they become too like each other, especially when the church becomes too like the world. The very beginning of Christianity was a hostile one, and in many places in the world where religion actually matters, in the public life of the place, which it doesn't really in the United States, I hate to tell you. Maybe in your hearts it does, and maybe we like to say that it does, but really it doesn't. If you compare with other places on earth, especially in the Middle East, if you look at the experience of Christians in Syria, for example, where just last week many Christians were killed for their faith, if you read the newspaper or online about experience of Christianity in Nigeria or in the Congo, these are places where martyrdom is happening every day, where religion is really a very important part of our conversation. That Christianity in particular, and Catholicism especially, is really fought against. Maybe you heard in Kansas this week, on the 28th of March, there's a group of Satanists who are going to have a black mass out in front of the capital of Kansas. And if you don't know what a black mass is, and this is why we have problems, by the way, when people receive on the hand. Now, I'm not saying you have to receive on the tongue, but this is why forever and ever and ever receiving on the hand was not allowed. Because what happens at a black mass is somebody sneaks into a Catholic church, receives communion, puts it in their pocket, and then the whole black mass is centered around the destruction and desecration in the most lewd ways you can imagine of the consecrated host. They mock us. They don't mock the Protestant communion. They mock Catholic communion because it's the real deal. So we have to pray against that. But if we begin to think that, our witness of this God, our witness of what we stand for is totally at home on this earth, in this world, then we're mistaken. We are mistaken. And our goal is not to convince the world to accept us. Our goal is, by our witness, to convince the world to come to know Him, to accept Him. Everything we are looking for that causes us to go astray, we will find in Jesus. We will. That sounds like a Hallmark card. It sounds like over-piet, but it's not. It's the truth. All of the hurt and pain and weirdness of your life that motivates you without you even knowing it sometimes to pursue every avenue of weirdness except for God can be healed in Jesus through the sacraments, through Christian community, authentic Christian community, through the experience of the gospel being lived out among you. Maybe you know the writer Dorothy Day. She was a kind of Catholic social justice warrior, if you want to call her that, in the 20th century. She was about as faithful as you can get. But she said her whole life of working in advocacy for the poor, for laborers, especially for unions, for better working conditions, for welfare that was driven by something besides the state. She said, I just want to make a world where it's easier for other people to be good. I love that. I want a world where it's easier for other people to be good, where I can change little by little the people around me, the circumstances around me, around this community here and now, so that people who find themselves in these weird situations don't feel alone and then go on it alone. They don't lash out. They don't create issues for themselves. How many people are living in a world where they don't know who their neighbors are? How many people are living where they don't feel like they have anybody they can ask for help? I need help moving a couch, or I need a place to stay, or I need someone to talk to. There's a lot of people who don't have even that. And yet, we're more connected, supposedly, than ever before. Isn't that ironic? Isn't that ironic? So this is what I want to say to us, is that in this gospel, you're very far away from Jerusalem. Jesus is on his way there, but he's far away from the city of Jerusalem. And remember in the scriptures, Jerusalem means city of peace or vision of peace. It's where God is. And if you go outside of Jerusalem, you're going away from God. And how interesting is it that Jesus is moving toward Jerusalem, but isn't quite there yet, but is already doing the work that he's come to do. In other words, Jesus is coming into these places where he's not allowed to be because the world said so, because whatever said so, social convention said so. Jesus is going to those places, totally eschewing social conventions, and going straight into that woman's life and heart, and reveals to her everything she's ashamed of, and changes her life to the point that she goes into town and says, "Come and meet this person who's told me all I've ever done. Could it be the Christ?" And many more began to believe in him because of this word. And then they say to her, "We no longer believe because of what you said, but we've come to him and we've heard for ourselves, and we know that he truly is the Savior of the world." So this is what Lent is. This is why Lent has this focus on the desert. You've gone out into the desert. Prayer, fasting, and almsgiving are three of the most important ways ever that you can go outside of yourself, to get out of this crisis of self-orientation, of bending in on yourself, of falling into the same sins over and over and over again, but making life about other people, other situations for a change. And not because it's nice, because the world says we should be nice. Atheists have soup kitchens. Don't forget that. We don't have soup kitchens because soup kitchens are great. We have soup kitchens because our neighbors are hungry and God told us to love them as ourselves, as if they were us. Do you see what I'm saying? We have this work not because it's nice to have the work, because the world thinks it's great to have the work, but we do it because God told us to, and we love those people. So the danger of the world the way it is now is the world wants the values that Christ gave us, but the world does not want Christ. The world is obsessed with the reconstruction of Notre Dame, but doesn't want to hear at all about what drove those people 850 years ago to build something like that in the first place. We want the values that Christ taught us, but we don't want Christ. And that's why we're so afraid and deranged and freaked out and nervous and unsure, as if the world was going to end tomorrow, and if that really mattered to us. We want the values that Christ taught us because we want Christ. That's what it is. Okay, so let me just leave you with this. Jesus does not expect you or me to go and find him on the mountain somewhere. Jesus does not expect you or me to crawl and claw our way through the weirdness of life and say, "Aha, here you are." One day Jesus is going to walk up to you at the well where you're hanging out in the hottest part of the day because you're ashamed to be around other people because those people know what kind of woman you've been. So you go at the worst time to do the worst job where you can be alone and unbothered. And in the place of shame and darkness and heat and toil, whatever that is for you, that's where the Lord is going to bust right through the door and sit down and say, "Could you give me a drink of water, please? Because I'm just as thirsty as you." That's what he does. He comes into the place where you thought he would never want to go, where you thought that disqualified you from even being on his radar. He comes into that place first and sits down with you, doesn't judge you, doesn't kick you out of the kingdom, but listens to you, challenges you, and invites you to consider that maybe he really is the one who can fill you with water that will never go away.